This is Professor Joe's Advocacy. I welcome you all to this new episode, The Allegory of the Cave. Socrates, imagine men living in an underground cave-like dwelling place, which has a way up to the light along its whole width, but the entrance is a long way up. The men have been there from childhood, with their necks and legs in fetters, so that they remain in the same place and can only see ahead of them, as their bonds prevent them from turning their heads. Light is provided by a fire burning some way behind them, and on a higher ground there is a path across the cave, and along this a low wall has been built, like the screen at a puppet show in front of the performers who show their puppets above it. Glaucon, I see it. Socrates. See then also men carrying along that wall so that they overtop it all kinds of artifacts, statues of men, reproductions of other animals in stone or wood, fashioned in all sorts of ways, and as is likely, some of the carriers are talking while others are silent. Glaucon. This is a strange picture and strange prisoners. Socrates. They are like us, I said. Do you think in the first place that such men could see anything of themselves and each other except the shadows which the fire casts upon the wall of the cave in front of them? Glaucon. How could they, if they have to keep their heads still throughout life? Socrates. And is not the same true of the objects carried along the wall? Socrates. If they could converse with one another, do you not think that they would consider these shadows to be the real things? Glaucon. Necessarily. Socrates. What if their prison had an echo which reached them from in front of them? Whenever one of the carriers passing behind the wall spoke, would they not think that it was the shadow passing in front of them which was talking? Do you agree? Glaucon. By Zeus, I do. Socrates. Altogether, then, one said, such men would believe the truth to be nothing else than the shadows of the artifacts? Glaucon. They must believe that. Socrates. Consider then what deliverance from their bonds and the curing of their ignorance would be if something like this naturally happened to them. Whenever one of them was freed, had to stand up suddenly, turn his head, walk, and look up toward the light, doing all that would give him pain, the flash of the fire would make it impossible for him to see the objects of which he had earlier seen the shadows. What do you think he would say if he was told that what he saw was foolishness, that he was now somewhat closer to reality and turned to things that existed more fully, that he saw more correctly? If one then pointed to each of the objects passing by, asked him what each was, and forced him to answer, do you not think he would be at a loss and believe that the things which he saw earlier were truer than the things now pointed out to him? Glaucon. Much truer, Socrates. If one then compelled him to look at the fire itself, his eyes would hurt. He would turn round and flee toward those things which he could see, and think that they were in fact clearer than those now shown to him. Glaucon. Quite so, Socrates. And if one were to drag him thence by force up the rough and steep path, and did not let him go before he was dragged into the sunlight, would he not be in physical pain and angry as he was dragged along? When he came into the light, with the sunlight filling his eyes, he would not be able to see a single one of the things which are now said to be true. Glaucon. Not at once, certainly. Socrates. I think he would need time to get adjusted before he could see things in the world above. At first he would see shadows most easily, then reflections of men and other things in water, then the things themselves. After this he would see objects in the sky, and the sky itself more easily at night, the light of the stars and the moon more easily than the sun, and the light of the sun during the day. Glaucon. Of course. Socrates. Then at last he would be able to see the sun, not images of it in water or in some alien place, but the sun itself in its own place, and be able to contemplate it. Glaucon. That must be so. Socrates. After this he would reflect that it is the sun which provides the seasons and the years, which governs everything in the visible world, and is also in some way the cause of those other things which he used to see. Glaucon. Clearly that would be the next stage. Socrates. What then? As he reminds himself of his first dwelling place, of the wisdom there, and of his fellow prisoners, would he not reckon himself happy for the change, and pity them? Glaucon, surely, Socrates. And if the men below had praise and honors from each other, and prizes for the man who saw most clearly the shadows that passed before them, and who could best remember which usually came earlier and which later, and which came together, and thus could most ably prophesy the future, do you think our man would desire those rewards and envy those who were honored and held power among the prisoners? Or would he feel, as Homer put it, that he certainly wished to be serf to another man without possessions upon the earth, and go through any suffering, rather than share their opinions, and live as they do? Glaucon, quite so. I think he would rather suffer anything. Socrates, reflect on this too. If this man went down into the cave again and sat down in the same seat, would his eyes not be filled with darkness, coming suddenly out of the sunlight? Glaucon, they certainly would. Socrates, and if he had to contend again with those who had remained prisoners in recognizing those shadows, while his sight was affected and his eyes had not settled down, and the time for this adjustment would not be short, would he not be ridiculed? Would it not be said that he had returned from his upward journey with his eyesight spoiled, and that it was not worth while even to attempt to travel upward? As for the man who tried to free them and lead them upward, if they could somehow lay their hands on him and kill him, they would do so. Glaucon, they certainly would. Socrates, this whole image, my dear Glaucon, must be related to what we said before. The realm of the visible should be compared to the prison dwelling, and the fire inside it to the power of the sun. If you interpret the upward journey and the contemplation of things above as the upward journey of the soul to the intelligible realm, you will grasp what I surmise, since you were keen to hear it. Whether it is true or not, only the God knows, but this is how I see it, namely that in the intelligible world the form of the good is the last to be seen, and with difficulty. When seen, it must be reckoned to be for all the cause of all that is right and beautiful, to have produced in the visible world both the light and the fount of light, while in the intelligible world it is itself that which produces and controls truth and intelligence, and he who is to act intelligently in public or in private must see it. Glaucon, I share your thought as far as I am able. Socrates, come then, share with me this thought also. Do not be surprised that those who have reached this point are unwilling to occupy themselves with human affairs, and that their souls are always pressing upward to spend their time there, for this is natural if things are as our parable indicates. Glaucon, that is very likely. Socrates, further, do you think it at all surprising that anyone coming to the evils of human life from the contemplation of the divine behaves awkwardly and appears very ridiculous while his eyes are still dazzled, and before he is sufficiently adjusted to the darkness around him, if he is compelled to contend in court or some other place about the shadows of justice, or the objects of which they are shadows, and to carry through the contest about these in the way these things are understood by those who have never seen justice itself? Glaucon, that is not surprising at all. Socrates, anyone with intelligence would remember that the eyes may be confused in two ways and from two causes, coming from light into darkness as well as from darkness into light. Realizing that the same applies to the soul, whenever he sees a soul disturbed and unable to see something, he will not laugh mindlessly, but will consider whether it has come from a brighter life and is dimmed because unadjusted, or has come from greater ignorance into greater light, and is filled with a brighter dazzlement. The former he would declare happy in its life and experience, the latter he would pity, and if he should wish to laugh at it, his laughter would be less ridiculous than if he laughed at the soul that has come from the light above. Glaucon, what you say is very reasonable. Socrates, we must then, if these things are true, think something like this about them, namely that education is not what some declare it to be. They say that knowledge is not present in the soul, and that they put it in, like putting sight into blind eyes. Glaucon, they sure say that. Socrates, our present argument shows that the capacity to learn and the organ with which to do so are present in every person's soul. It is as if it were not possible to turn the eye from darkness to light without turning the whole body. So one must turn one's whole soul from the world of becoming until it can endure to contemplate reality and the brightest of realities, which we say is the good. Glaucon. Yes, Socrates. Education, then, is the art of doing this very thing, this turning around, the knowledge of how the soul can most easily and most effectively be turned around. It is not the art of putting the capacity of sight into the soul. The soul possesses that already, but it is not turned the right way or looking where it should. This is what education has to deal with. Thank you for watching. Please continue to support my advocacy.